The Edmonton Oilers are on a three-game winning streak, and now would be a fantastic time for the Jets to end their streak and start Winnipeg's own winning streak. We'll talk about how the Jets can pull this off against a talented, rolling Oilers team, despite their struggles, on tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets.
You're Locked On the Hockey Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, Jets fans, and welcome to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HOLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. As always, thanks for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is always free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. But most of all, we just love and appreciate your support. Tonight's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app and be sure to use promo code LOCKEDONNHL to get $20 off your first ticket purchase. Highly recommend Game Time for all of your last-minute ticket deals. Now, like I said at the top of the episode, in just a few hours, the Jets are going to be taking on the Oilers. I wanted to have the preview episode up yesterday, but apologies, I'm just not feeling well. You can probably tell by my voice, still fighting off whatever is currently ailing me. So tonight's episode will probably be a little bit shorter than usual, but let's talk about Edmonton, right? Because the Oilers are on a three-game winning streak and have seemingly found maybe a bit of a lifeline. I know that firing Woodcroft, most people agreed with it. The funny thing with the Oilers is that, Knoblauch actually hasn't been doing that great of a job. And Woodcroft had the Oilers leading in so many different categories. They were one of the top teams in expected goals for. They were one of the strongest chance creators. But the goaltending and the lack of finishing killed the team, which honestly, in some ways resembles some of what used to happen with the Jets, where they could be better than their record, but the problem was, a couple of mistakes end up in the back of your net, and you just don't have the finishing talent. But the Oilers should very much be on that level of finishing, right? The Edmonton squad that they've assembled is pretty decent, relatively speaking. But, looking at the lines, right, your first line, you've got Nugent-Hopkins, McDavid, and Hyman. I would say that this is one of the lines that you have to shut down, but obviously it's McDavid, right? Shutting down Connor McDavid, even when he's like half injured and limping along, is really difficult. So I would say you really can't overlook Nugent-Hopkins on this line. I know McDavid and Hyman have traditionally been some of the bigger breadwinners as of late, but I'll tell you Nugent-Hopkins is having a surprisingly good season. He's just been a really capable two-way attacker over the last few years. He scores at a pretty decent rate, and, with McDavid kind of drawing all the attention, Hyman crashing the net and still being very skilled, RNH just doesn't have as much pressure, right? He can sort of float around, drift into good shooting and passing lanes, and create and score opportunities. So not a guy that I think the Jets want to sleep on. Second line, you've got Kane, Draisaitl, and Brown. Not a lot to really be upset here with. I think other than Draisaitl, this line is going to be a bit on the slower side and more, focused on the forecheck, right? Kane and Brown are kind of more physical attackers, guys who will try and jostle around the net and create opportunities that are a bit greasier. I think the Jets should be able to contain this line, provided the Lowry line and the second line are able to get things really going. But the bottom six is where the Jets probably have the biggest advantage, because Foegele, McLeod, and Ryan as your third line is not particularly great when you're going up against Niederreiter, Lowry, and Appleton. And the fourth line of Janmark, Hamblin, I don't even know who that is, and Ernie, yikes. Janmark used to be decent. I don't really know anything about Hamblin, so I'm not going to speak to his level of performance, but my guess is if you're on the fourth line in Edmonton, it's probably not the most promising of signs. And for the Jets, this is a team where, quite honestly, aside from Draisaitl and McDavid, maybe Nurse when he's scoring at a really high clip, the Jets should be able to pull this off, right? looking at Winnipeg's lineup, there's been a couple of changes. Kyle Connor, Mark Scheifele, and Ehlers are going to be starting the game together, which obviously for the Jets should be fun, right? This trio looked really dangerous in the last game, and while they didn't play a ton of minutes, the minutes they did play were certainly positive. The second line is where I maybe raise a slight eyebrow just because Perfetti, Nemesnikov, and Iafallo are all together. I don't know that Iafallo is going to last up there. He got sent to the fourth line in the last game, and given that Vilardi will be coming back in tonight's game, I suspect that we will see Gabriel at some point get promoted up once he's got his skating legs under him. But the third line, they haven't touched. Niederreiter, Lowry, Appleton, same stuff, nothing really crazy there, about what you would expect. Now, like I said, you heard me allude to it, but Vilardi is playing down. He's with Barron, Gustafsson right on the fourth line. I don't think that's going to stay there, though. I would imagine that Vilardi probably gets promoted. My guess is to the second line, he'll swap spots with Iafallo. If they do that, I guess the only comment that I would really have is that I kind of do miss a little bit of the defensive presence that Vilardi or Perfetti brings to a line with like Connor and Scheifele, because those guys are really focused on offense and scoring, right? Whereas Vilardi and Perfetti bring a more defensively oriented skill on top of really good offensive production. So, it is what it is. As long as Scheifele and Ehlers and Connor are just lighting up the goal, I don't really have any concerns. But it would be nice maybe to see Vilardi at some point get back onto the first line, because we know that Perfetti, Nemesnikov, and Ehlers together create tons of chaos and are a great unit. So, you've got your pick of the litter when it comes to a really good top six. With Vilardi back, I mean, this team is just really deep up front. And so for me, this game should very much be in Winnipeg's favor. But I did say that in previous games, and that hasn't always worked out. With the Stars game, that one I don't really know that I was as upset about, just because Dallas is really good. And I think the Jets had moments where they were fine, but obviously the way that Dallas likes to block down low kind of gave the Jets fits. But overall, right, I would expect the Jets to come away with this Oilers game with a win, so long as they can stay off the PK. That could be a problem, but we'll have to just wait and see. Hopefully Hellebuck is ready to have a really strong performance, because my guess is anytime the Jets are going to be on the penalty kill, he will be tested. But give me your score predictions in the comments below. I'm going to say 3-2 Jets or 4-3 Jets. Going to be a tight one, but probably a fun one. So cross your fingers, and let's hope the Jets can light Stuart Skinner up. But of course, around the league, the Jets are just one of many teams right now that are currently pushing for playoff spots or trying to solidify their holds. We'll talk about how the divisions continue to shape up and whether there's been any change in the top teams in just a little bit. Before we go any further, though, I do want to shout out our friends and partners at Game Time. When it comes to buying tickets, a lot of you know exactly how expensive and frustrating it is. Buying tickets is never easy, right? And you go through a ticket service, they charge you hidden fees, you've got service fees, and by the time you finish paying for say two $30 tickets, right? You think it should be $60 after taxes and fees, you're talking like $120. Game Time knows exactly the amount of pain you're going through. And worst of all, sometimes when you're buying these tickets, you don't even know where you're sitting, or you don't have a very good view. They offer you in-venue arena views when possible, and they also offer killer last-minute ticket deals, plenty of flash deals, and they want to save you time and money. Game Time wants to make the ticket buying process as simple and straightforward as humanly possible, all with a lowest price guaranteed, event cancellation protection, and so much more. So if you're ready to take the guesswork out of buying tickets, download Game Time right now. Create an account and be sure to use promo code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Hello, friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Every day, thank you for rejoining us in tonight's episode as we talk about how the league is shaping up and some of the positional jockeying around the divisions that we're seeing right now. Later on, we'll talk about which of these top teams currently higher up in the standings are legit and for real, and which teams might be due for some regression in the back half of the season. But for now, let's focus on the top teams. Before we get to that, though, just wanted to shout out a really cool thing the Locked On Network is doing. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top stories of the day with our local experts from Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. Now, circling back, of course, to the NHL standings, right now there's been a lot of chaos, a lot of movement, but I will say some teams have generally solidified reasonable positions, right? I would say out east is where there's quite a bit of jockeying because you have teams that are legit pretty good, plus a number of bubble teams that are currently right around where they are in the standings, which leads to a lot of confusion as to which teams are for real. And again, like I said, later in the show, we'll talk about which squads are the ones to really watch out for. But in the Atlantic, you've got Boston, Florida, and then the Maple Leafs in the first three spots. But after that, right, tied with the Leafs are Detroit and Tampa Bay. So 25 points, very few points split these squads. I think Toronto is only probably okay with this because they've got a game in hand at least on their other opponents. But a lot of stuff here where there's close proximity in the middle of the pack, and even the bottom of the division, right? The Buffalo Sabres and the Canadiens are only trailing those 3 to 5 spots by 2 or 3 points, right? They've got 22 points apiece. We know that the Sabres have some offensive pop. If they get some saves and have a stronger defensive performance, who's to say that they don't start to really climb up the standings? The Ottawa Senators are kind of one of the weird ducks there because they've only played 17 games, where everyone else has at least played 20. So I guess because of the Sweden trip or something, maybe. Either way, though, they've got some ground to make up. And, with only 16 points so far and a bit of a tough start to the year, they are probably concerned more about missing the playoffs yet again, which they've had trouble making over the past few years. Now, in the Metro, you've got the Rangers, the Hurricanes, and the Caps, which, for those of you who remember the last time, probably recall the Caps were a little bit further down. They have since kind of started to find form again. Not a great team, but again, they've got talent, right? They have the ability to put up some decent numbers. I just don't know if that's a team that I would necessarily be counting on come, May or June. Now, the Flyers, Islanders, Devils, Penguins, and Blue Jackets round out the bottom half of the division, which, if you can believe it, the spots between 4 and 7 are only separated by 2 points. So very close in the standings. Even the Caps only have a 1-point lead on the Flyers. There's just a lot of proximity, and the Blue Jackets aren't even that far off despite being in last place, only trailing the Penguins by 3 points. But of course, they've played more games than everyone else. 24 games, in fact, so it's not really been a great run of form. I don't even know how the general manager is still in the office. I thought he would have been fired by now. But overall, I think you're seeing some pretty tight standings here. There's a lot of jockeying for like the middle of the pack, and I think that's where the Metro Division and the Atlantic are both going to find it really hard to get some distance for like a wild card run. I think the wild card spots are going to see a lot of change throughout the season, and I think it's going to be a really tough road to the playoffs. Now, of course, out west, things are also actually kind of interesting. Out west, you've got in the Central Division, you've got Colorado, Dallas, and Winnipeg at the top of the Central, and then you've got St. Louis, Nashville, Arizona, Minnesota, and Chicago on the back bottom of this division. But really, I think what you're seeing here is that the middle of the pack and the top of the division, again, are kind of close. What I'll say about the Central is that I think Winnipeg so far has maybe underperformed their record a little bit. I think after that first start, the first 1-3 start, I would expect the Jets to start moving up a little bit. Although I will say Dallas is really good, so the Jets might be kind of stuck in third for the remainder of the season. I guess it depends on what happens with Colorado, if they continue their hot run of form or if they start to fade away. But I do think that this is a pretty accurate reflection of who the best teams in the Central are. Colorado, Dallas, and Winnipeg versus everyone else who is, just about average, right? I think average to bad. Like the Hawks are bad, the Wild are bad, but everyone else is kind of like in the middle of the pack. In the Pacific, you've got Vegas, Vancouver, and LA. Of that group, I think Vegas and LA are the ones that I really believe in. After those teams, though, everyone else in the division, barring the Canucks, is just bad, right? Calgary is not good. The Kraken have really fallen off. Anaheim, Edmonton, and San Jose are all kind of in death spirals of differing variations. Although we've talked about the Oilers maybe being better than you would think, but probably not good enough to climb into a playoff spot anytime soon. And the Sharks, all I can say is it is a long climb to a top draft, or I guess a long fall to a top draft spot. So all they can hope for is that Macklin Celebrini awaits them at the end of this very, very bad road. But of course, all of these teams competing for playoff spots, which teams are true cup contenders? We'll talk about that in just a little bit, because I think the Jets are one of those teams that has an argument, but is maybe a little bit further off than we want to hope for so far. But we'll get to that in just a little bit. Before we go any further, though, I do want to shout out our friends and partners at eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. What brings home the winning trophy is also what keeps your vehicle alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers to roof racks to exhaust kits, LED headlights, and so much more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has your back. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay's Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your vehicle every time, or you get your money back. With eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and come away with a victory. Keep your vehicle alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply. eBay's Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. Hello, friends, and welcome back to these closing thoughts of tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Every day, thank you for joining us in tonight's episode as we wrap up really quickly with some final thoughts on which teams are like legit contenders this year and which teams are perhaps a little bit more on the not necessarily pretendery side, but maybe just not as good. First off, though, let's talk about the Bruins and Panthers. As two of the top teams in the Atlantic, I think a lot of folks are, kind of expecting the Bruins to do that thing again where they win the President's Trophy and then they get trounced in the first round of the playoffs. I think this team isn't as talented as it was last year. Obviously, the retirement of Bergeron is a pretty big loss, and when you see how they're getting scoring production this year, plus who it's coming from, you kind of wonder how sustainable it is. For my money, I kind of feel like the Bruins are maybe needing like another roster move, right? They're going to have to trade for somebody, is my guess, because I feel like the forward group is okay, but it's not great. And if it gets like an injection from something, I don't know if they're going to trade or try to swing for like a big player. I don't even know how much cap room they have at this point to make a move. They might be kind of stuck in some areas, but what I will say is like defensively, they're still strong. This is like a pretty rigid team. They have been hard to play against. I don't know that they're going to lose in the first round again, but I don't know that they're strong enough to make it through more than like 2 rounds. So something to keep an eye on. The Panthers are kind of in a similar boat where they actually play pretty decent hockey, but generally speaking, I'm not a big believer in them. I don't think that they're as deep as they were in previous years, and I feel like I don't know. When it comes to them, I'm very suspicious. I feel like Paul Maurice has them playing reasonably balanced hockey, and they're a fun team, but I feel like they don't have like maybe the best depth. Maybe that's where I'm kind of feeling like they've definitely declined a bit. Still a tough team and still not one that I think people are going to really want to face come postseason time, especially in a 7-game series where stuff gets weird. But in general, right, I feel like if I'm looking at any team in the Atlantic that scares me, it's probably Tampa. Tampa is the team that once Vasilevsky's back up and running, that squad does kind of concern me. I know that they've aged out a bit, and I know that they've conceded tons and tons of goals this year, but kind of ignore the goals conceded because their goaltending tandem has been awful without Vasilevsky. Look at how many they've scored, though. 80 goals already, which I believe is just about at the top of the league. There's only a couple of teams that have scored that at like either the same or more than that. Actually, 2 of them to be exact. So This Tampa team, while they might have some very clear flaws, I would not overlook them at all. Now, once you move down towards the Metro, I think it gets very complicated because, the Rangers seem pretty legit. I've heard interesting things that perhaps there's a couple of players who have really carried the load for this squad. I don't know. I feel like they've gotten a pretty good top nine, and Shesterkin is hard to really bet against. But other than that, right, the Canes are decent. The Caps are okay, but I feel like the rest of this division just isn't that good. I do think the Devils are probably due for regression once Hischier and Hughes are really fully fit and back up and running. But I don't know, man. Their goaltending's not good. The Penguins have really struggled. Aside from the Rangers, I just don't know that anyone else in the Metro really concerns me. The Canes aren't getting enough saves either. So, it's kind of a rough division. Probably worse off than it's been in previous years. The West, obviously, is where there's some pretty clear top teams. I think Colorado, once they're back up and running and at full speed like they've been recently, they're going to be a really tough out. They've definitely had quite a few games where they've maybe been a little bit loose and fast, but I feel like recently they've really sharpened their game. I watched one or two of their games recently, and they looked very impressive with the puck movement. I thought that they created really good, dangerous opportunities, and they weren't playing anyone all that great, but they still broke them down very quickly. So not a team that the Jets want to face in the postseason. Would not be a fun time for a 7-game series. Dallas also defensively dominant, a real team that I think is going to be an absolute pain in the butt come postseason time. I know that they were on a little bit of a downward streak when the Jets faced them and ended up losing, but still a team that does concern me. Winnipeg is going to have to find a way to beat squads like this because once they get to the playoffs, it's going to be an absolute grind. Out in the Pacific, I really think I'm mostly scared by Vegas and LA. Those teams play really great hockey, and we know that the Jets just can't be Vegas. They almost never do. It's really rare that the Jets come away with a victory. It's really frustrating that the Jets can't beat them. That's all I'm going to say about that. LA, it's really funny because Dubois really hasn't been that big of a factor for this team, but they are one of the scariest teams that no one really seems to be talking about. They have one of the most positive goal differentials. They have a great defense. Their goal scoring has been very strong this year, and they have depth up and down the lineup, and they play fast. So this is a squad that I think come the playoff time is going to be a really impressive team to have to go through. So do not sleep on the Kings. They might be better than they've been in years. The Canucks, that's a team that I think the bubble is going to burst at some point. They've already scored 91 goals, which is pretty friggin' ridiculous. Is it sustainable? No. Is it fun as heck? Yeah. I think it's pretty cool to see a team like that really hasn't been that good lately go on a bit of a heater. But if you're a Canucks fan listening to this for any reason, just know that fairy tale is probably going to end over the next few months. But hey, maybe they go all the way and shock everyone. Let me know which teams you think are true contenders in the comments below or at my social medias at HLLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. But as always, for tonight's episode, that is going to be all the time that we have. Thanks so much for making us your first listen of the day every day. We'll be back here tomorrow with hopefully some good coverage of a Jets win against the Oilers. But like I said, that's all the time that we've got. Have a great night, and go Jets, go.